I'm Ed Pruitt. We're here at the African American Museum of Beginnings in Pomona, California, and we're here with Kenneth B Morris Jr., a famous descendant of some famous people. Mr. Morris, welcome to the African American Museum of Beginnings.
Thank you, Ed. It's good to be here.
Now, would you be kind enough to tell us what your relationship is to Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington?
Wow. Well, I am the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass, and I'm also the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington. And it's interesting because every time I tell people what my relationship is to those two great American heroes, with all of those greats, it sometimes makes me sound very far removed. But I always like to tell the story about my great-grandmother Fanny Douglass, to whom I was very close, and she lived to be 103 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She met Frederick Douglass when she was a little girl. And my aunt Portia, to whom I was also very close, she lived to be 95, and she was Booker T. Washington's daughter.
Oh.
So even with all of those greats, I can say I stand just one person away from history.
So you had that connection, that direct connection. Now, how did the two families come together with the generations being so separated?
Well, that's one of the questions that people always ask me the first time they meet me, because a lot of times people will say, Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, I didn't know that they were related, and of course they weren't related,
right.
But the way the families came together was through marriage,
mm-hmm.
and it happened on my mom's side of the family. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was Frederick Douglass III, and he was Frederick Douglass's great-grandson, and my grandmother, my mom's mom, Nettie Hancock Washington,
mm-hmm.
was Booker T. Washington's granddaughter. And my grandparents met in 1941 at Tuskegee, which of course is a school that Booker T. Washington founded in 1881. My grandparents were rushing across campus, literally smacked right into each other, didn't know that the other descended from an historic family, and they fell in love at first sight and wound up getting married 3 months later. And when my mom was born, Nettie Washington Douglass, she was the person that united the bloodlines of the family. So that's how the two families came together.
What a story.
Yeah.
Now, have you always known about your unique connection to history?
My first memory was when I was 5 years old. Now, of course, I grew up in Frederick Douglass's summer beach home. I spent all of my summers there from the time I was a baby. So I always had, images of my ancestors all around. And when I was about 5 years old is when I really started to notice that they were two people of importance. And can you imagine growing up and your ancestors are on statues and they're on money, stamps, there are bridges named for them, schools named for them, libraries named for them. So when I started to see that, I really started to understand that I descended from two pretty important people.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that right around 5 years old is when I really started to take a look at who they were.
That sounds like a lot for a 5-year-old to embrace.
Yeah, it was not always easy.
Yeah.
There were times when I was growing up that there was a lot of pressure that was put on me, and just like some of the others in the family that came before me, there was a lot of pressure. But certainly as I started to get older, understood that I really lived in the long past shadow of my ancestors. So it took quite a while for me to be able to come out of that and do the work that we're doing right now.
Well, that's remarkable. And the work that you're doing, the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, can you tell us about that organization?
Yeah, my mom and I started the organization along with a good friend of mine by the name of Robert Benz in 2007. And we started the organization with the idea that we would go on and work to help carry on and perpetuate the legacies of our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted the organization to be more than just about history. We wanted it to be about helping people and making a difference. And we started to think about the types of things that Douglass and Washington would be interested in if they were around today. And I found through a National Geographic magazine a cover story called 21st Century Slaves,
Mm-hmm.
that slavery still exists today, and it exists in every civilized and uncivilized country around the world, including here in the United States. And it was just a natural that Frederick Douglass was the great abolitionist. If he were here today, I truly believe he would still be fighting for human rights, of course, but also fighting for people's freedom. And I kind of have a feeling that he would expect his descendant to continue that fight for freedom. And then when you take on the other legacy in Booker T. Washington being the great educator, it was natural for us to really combine the two legacies and then to begin to raise awareness about this issue of human trafficking and modern day slavery. And the way that we felt the best way to go about educating the public on the existence is where education should start, and that's with young people. So what we've done with the organization, we've developed a curriculum called History, Human Rights, and the Power of One that we have in schools all over the country, and eventually we would like to see this as an international project. But what the curriculum does is it teaches students about the history in this country, the history of slavery. We talk about great people like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington and many others that sacrificed so much, that may have given up their lives just for the freedoms that we enjoy in this country today, just so that some of us have the right to sit in a classroom and get an education. So we really want to inspire students with the legacies of the great people that came before us, that really laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement and many other things that these young people have heard about. And then we transition into this modern day human rights issue, and that slavery still exists. And we'd like to see modern day abolitionists do exactly what Frederick Douglass did, and that's to communicate the inhumanity of slavery to their communities. And then the Power of One portion of it is really motivating students to act within their community, to fight against human trafficking. So the curriculum they're service learning projects. So once they've learned about the history and then they learn about this contemporary human rights issue, then they work on service projects in their community that are all about raising awareness about this issue.
Well, I was about to ask you, do the legacies of your ancestors resonate with young people? But it sounds like they do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They are,
yeah, and it's wonderful to see how students and teachers just really are impacted by this type of learning and this type of education. And we spend most of our time in underserved communities where young girls are most vulnerable to becoming victims of sex trafficking, because the average age that a girl in this country is forced into prostitution is 13 years old.
Wow.
So we're in communities where these girls are vulnerable. We also have an opportunity to talk to young boys about their attitudes towards women and girls and choices that they make as young men and adult males, so that they become part of the solution and not a part of the problem. So we're really talking to kids that are facing their own challenges in their own lives, and they look, and sometimes they think that they're facing obstacles that are too much for them to overcome, they're insurmountable for them to overcome. And when they can look at the legacies of two men like my ancestors that were born slaves, and of course it doesn't get any worse than that, but yet through the power of education and the power of knowledge, they were able to rise up out of slavery and their conditions to go on to affect the lives of millions and millions of people in a very positive way. So those are tangible examples for young people today to connect to those legacies and say, if they were able to do that, then there's nothing that I can't overcome in my own lives. So it's just a wonderful thing to see how they're impacted.
It's wonderful to hear. Now, I understand that there was a statue unveiled of Frederick Douglass in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the ceremony?
It was probably one of the greatest days of my life, and certainly of our family in our lives. And of course, the birth of my two daughters was pretty important in my marriage. But seeing this statue unveiled in the visitor center of the U.S. Capitol, and it's a beautiful sculpture, and it just stands so tall. I don't remember exactly how tall it is, but to think that he went from slave cabin to the U.S. Capitol, and all of the politicians, with the exception of President Obama, who was out of the country, I think, at the G8 summit, but Vice President Biden, all of the leaders from both sides of the aisle, from the House and the Senate, came together, and they spoke so glowingly of my great ancestor, and all of politics was put aside, and they just talked about this great hero, and there was music, and it was a patriotic ceremony, and there was a choir that sang, and it was just such a wonderful day. And my mom had an opportunity to close the ceremony. She was introduced by Vice President Biden, and she gave a beautiful speech about the spirit of Frederick Douglass and how he touches all of us, and how he belongs really to the country and to the world, but there's still a special part of him that we hold in our family. So we're just so proud of everything that he contributed to our country and to the world, and we're just so proud of the love and the humility and everything that he's passed down throughout the generations that I carry with me today.
Well, that's wonderful, and we are so proud to have you here at the African American Museum of Beginnings. Thank you very much. Now, for more information about yourself and your family history, what should we do?
The best thing to do to get in contact with us is to go to our website, and the website is fdfi.org, and that's the acronym for Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. And we have all of the information on the family. There's some beautiful photographs, old photographs that are not in the history books. And then you can get into contact with us about our human rights work that we're doing in schools to really uplift and empower people. You know, Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And if you go to our website, you'll be able to get a lot of information on how we're building strong children.
Well, that is much appreciated.
Thank you, Ed.
so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure.